Hi, my name is Sham. I'm going to be talking about visual analytics using Tableau software. So I'm using the latest version of Tableau software as of now, which is 10.3. And let's open it up from the desktop. And when you open it up, this is the first screen that you're probably going to see. So we'll come back to the screen in a bit. You have connection options here on the left, and you have two types of connections. One is you can connect to a file, or the second set of options let you connect to a server. You can also have saved data sources, which we'll talk about later. And this white space that you see here is going to be it will show you the most recent workbooks that you worked on, right? So as you start getting more workbooks, you start saving them. Your most recent workbooks will start showing up here as tiles. So some great options to the right here. Tableau has tons of training videos, help guides, and so on. So you can kind of discover more things that you can do with Tableau on this section. And it has additional resources here that people talk about, like blogs and industry happenings and so on. And you also have something called as a Viz of the Week. So do check this out. So there are some pretty interesting information views that do get published out here, which talk about the Viz of the Week. And it keeps changing every week. There's some pretty neat visualizations out there that you can click on and see what others have been doing in the Tableau community. Right now, because we have not imported any data, but once you import some data, Tableau will automatically assign or divide your data into these two broad categories, okay? And we'll keep referring back to dimensions and measures when we talk about chart types as well, okay? So you also have filters. Obviously, filters mean exactly what they are. You can filter your data for a specific variable using a specific variable and so on, right? So the other thing that also you have is quick menu options, right? So if you want to create a new workbook, you can basically click on this Tableau icon and then create a new workbook. You can have undos. So this is very similar to a Windows function menu, right? So you can have left, which is basically an undo, or you have a right arrow, which basically does a redo. This floppy disk looking icon is exactly what it means. It saves your work. So I would strongly recommend keep saving your work, because you don't know when you might do something complex and crashes it. Believe me, I've done a lot of work and I've forgotten to save it, and then I had to redo it from scratch. So make sure you always save your work periodically. Okay. So this plus icon with the cylinder basically says that you can connect to a new data source. So if you want to connect a new data, you can click on this cylinder icon. It's going to take you to a new menu option wherein you can import data sets from multiple sources. This cylinder icon, it says pause auto updates. It's not that frequently used, but pause is basically, think about if you're doing a lot of graphical rendering, if you're displaying data at the lowest level of detail in its granularity, and every time you drag and drop a field onto the view, it's going to take some time to render. So this pause button is really useful when you click on pause update, so you can do all your calculations, you can bring in all your fields that you want, you can lay it out exactly the way that you like it. And then if you click on it again, it's going to start playing, or you unpause it, and then your views start to render. Okay. This view basically says, I'm going to create a new worksheet. And the way you would use this, again, in Tableau, there's multiple ways you can do the same thing, right? So as you start using the tool, you're going to learn that it's pretty straightforward, pretty common to have more than one ways to do a specific thing, right? So if you click on this drop down, I have three options. I can create a new worksheet, a new dashboard, or a new story. We'll talk more about these in a bit, but for now, just know these are three options that are available for you. Now I'm going to scroll down here where you see sheet 1. So that is a worksheet. So whatever work we are going to do right now, it's going to be on this specific worksheet. Now, if you want to create a new worksheet, you can either go back on top and click on new worksheet, or you can click this plus icon here, and that is also going to create a new worksheet. Same thing with the dashboard. If I want to create a new dashboard, I can click on this drop down and click on a new dashboard, or I can click on this drop down here and say create a new dashboard. Same thing with a story. Obviously, this is it has a storybook icon. So click on this. This will create a new story, and this will also do the same thing. Okay. So these are three options for you to create multiple worksheets. So if you've done some work and you don't want to undo, but if you want to clear your sheet and start from a blank slate, that's what this next tab will do here. So one that says clear worksheet and with a cross. So that is what a clear worksheet will do. This icon here is basically, now by the way, you would have noticed as I hover my mouse or place my mouse above those icons, a tooltip will appear that will also tell you what terminology I've been using. So like what's populated out here, this basically swaps your columns and rows. So this is a very useful tool, especially when you're doing visual analytics, right? So when you want to view your charts quickly in one way and then quickly the other way, you can use this one-touch swap option, wherein you don't need to be bothered about dragging and dropping from rows and columns and dragging and dropping away from rows and columns and so on. So you can kind of use this one-touch swap option to swap rows and columns of data. This arrow mark that you see here is a quick ascending sort. As you see, the arrow goes from top to bottom. You can do a quick ascending sort, and you can see these icons that basically reflect what an ascending sort looks like. You start with the lowest bar and go to the highest bar. The next one is basically a sort descending, wherein you have the highest value on top, followed by the next highest value, and so on till you reach the lowest point, kind of indicated by those bars that you see there, whether it's ascending or descending. This is an option that is kind of useful when you're trying to use colors. So when you're trying to use colors, highlight options is really good when you have when you want to highlight certain things. Obviously, that's what it means. And we'll look at some examples later. When you want to group members, when you want to group certain characters, say, for example, I want to group customers belonging in my southern region and my western region, I can kind of use this group member icon, which the icon looks like a gem clip, wherein you can group related items together and then use that in a different visual. This show marked labels with a text icon is one of the most frequently used, at least by me. If I want to display, when I want to create a view, I want to display the labels, I just do a quick one-touch text label, mark labels. I click on that, my marks are displayed. Okay. You also have an option by default. Any view that you create, it creates a standard view, right? It has a standard view that basically thinks, so Tableau automatically renders your charts, be it your map, a bar, a pie, a line. It automatically chooses the size based on the resolution, based on the width and the height of the chart. But you have the option to customize it. Say if all I have is 3 bars, Tableau is not going to take up all the space. But if you choose to ignore Tableau's advice and say, you know what, I want to use the entire white space for my 3 bars, if you click on entire view, your entire view on this screen will be taken up by those 3 bars. So this is where you can kind of play with the display parameters of what's being displayed on your chart types. In case you click on something, you forget what is there, or this happens to us always, right? So when you're using a new tool, especially when you're trying to look at, when you clicked on something and then you forgot what you've done, this is a great place to come back and see what is it that you could have missed. Say, for example, if I'll notice the marks card here, right? So I can see all my colors, my size, my text, and so on. So by mistake, if something happens, my marks card disappears here. Don't panic. It's there. You've not done something wrong. You've not done, excuse me, you've not done something irreversible. all it does is go back to the marks card and see what is it that you're missing. So if you notice, my marks card is not checked back, and if I click on it, then your marks card appears back again. So this is a great tip, especially for beginners. As you start playing with the tool, if you make some mistakes, if you lose something, this is a great place to come back and look at what is it that you want to view on this window. This view that looks like a presentation or a PowerPoint slide show is exactly that. It puts your entire view onto presentation mode. It basically says, you know what, as a user, maybe if I'm trying to present it to an end user, I don't want to see columns and rows and what you've done with filters and dimension and all that. Just show me your actual work. Just show me what's most important. So if I click on this presentation mode, your entire screen looks like this. So all you see is just a visual that you created. Obviously, this is blank because we've not imported data, we've not created visuals yet. But once you start creating visuals, this is what your screen is going to look like, okay, when you put it in PowerPoint mode or presentation mode. So to get back to your original view, again, there's more than one ways to do this. I can either hit escape, or I can go down and click on this icon here, which says exit presentation mode. So both do the same thing. I'm going to hit the escape and I'm back to where I am. So these are quick menu options. So there are also other options here. So if you look at your, these menu options are very typical to your Windows options, right? So whatever you can do with file systems, you can click on file. You obviously can create a new file. You can open up an existing file. You can close the work that you're doing. You can do a save. You don't need to, again, remember, like I said previously, you can either click on save here, or if you're used to the menu option, you can click on file and click a save. You can give it a different name and so on. So these are multiple options. You can also print your work and print your work to a PDF, which we'll show in later sessions. The data tab gives you options to choose a new data source. Again, this option is also available on the quick menu. The worksheet tab gives you things that you can do on the worksheet. What we are seeing here is a specific worksheet. So whatever you can do on the worksheet in terms of formatting, in terms of creating a new worksheet or showing a summary, you can basically control using this menu option. Same thing goes for a dashboard. We have not created a new dashboard yet, so that's why all of these are grayed out. So once you create a new dashboard, and from a dashboard, if you click on this menu option here, you're going to see other options like layouts of your dashboards. You can format your dashboards. You can copy whatever image, whatever view is there on the dashboard as an image, and so on. Story is the same thing. So story also, obviously, once you create a new story, these grayed out images will get populated because those are the options, the actions that you can do inside your story. The analysis tab is very useful, especially when you're trying to create non-standard charts in Tableau. So we'll come back to this. When you're dealing with calculated fields, you can create a whole bunch of new fields that are not even part of your original data sets. So you can create calculations, you can create things, or basically create different variables that are not part of a data set using this menu option. And you can change the way that your totals are performing. You can show a grand total or a column total, a row total, and so on using these options. You can also choose what you want to do with empty rows, empty columns, and so on. Okay, so there are a whole host of options you can do with the analysis tab. Maps also has a separate tab. So once you have geospatial data, it automatically creates lat long values for you to use the data to show it in maps, countries, cities, states, zip codes, even custom maps like to the lat long level. So basically, these are options that you have to format or create maps, change options for maps. Format is one of my pain points, right? Personally, I hate formatting options because it takes a lot of time for me to format my work. But this is a good starting point. So if you want to start formatting, your font, your alignment, your shading, your borders if you have some tables, or if you want to add some annotations, if you want to add some legends, if you want to format your legends, a whole host of formatting options here. We'll explore some of these as we start looking at some applications, but this is where you would start thinking about formatting. So when you want to format your view, this is where we'll come and look into it. So once we're done with formatting, the next option you have here, you have a whole host of options for this server. So what does server mean? So server is like the Rolls-Royce of Tableau products, right? So what you're seeing here is a desktop version. So whatever work that you do, you save, it's saved on your local machine. So if you want to email this file to a user, they probably need to have another desktop that they've installed in order for them to interact with your work. Or if you don't want to do that, if you or your company or your client has invested in a Tableau server, then all I need to do is just get the credentials, and I can publish my work by using logon credentials, and that is going to generate a hyperlink, and I can email that hyperlink to my end users, and they can basically interact with my dashboard using their web browser. So that's what a server does. I'll talk a little bit more in detail about publishing options in a later module, but for now, just understand these are options for you to save your work in different formats, different products. Tableau Public, while we are here, I also want to talk about Tableau Public. This is an open source. Well, when I say open source, it's free, right? So this is where you would save your work free of cost. You don't need any license. So Tableau makes this available for anyone who has an internet connection. You basically sign up for a Tableau Public account. You save your work to a Tableau Public, and basically it generates a hyperlink. You email that link to anyone with a pretty decent internet connection should be able to view your work, not just view your work, but also be able to interact with the dashboard if you set them up that way. So this is where you would publish your work. Just be aware that whatever work that you publish on Tableau Public is available for the entire world to see. So don't go publishing confidential company information there. It's great for high-level generic information, but generally not recommended if you're using confidential, competitive, sensitive data, because the data gets saved along with the workbook. This window option is pretty straightforward. So it basically controls what you see in the window. So just like the previous example, if you remember, I was talking about the marks card. If you forget and see, if you forget by mistake, if you hide something, by mistake, if you want to know how to bring it back, you would click on this shelf. Same thing happens on this window as well. If you, for some reason, if this entire sidebar, the sidebar basically is your dimensions and measures. You saw it for one instant, you did something, or if your kid stepped into your computer and just was just playing with your laptop, it got hidden. This is where you would come back and see what was hidden, and you would basically unhide it. Okay. So one other option here, which is a bookmark. I'll talk a little bit about bookmarks in a later session, but this is a great way for you to reuse some of your work. So say, for example, if you're collaborating, so if you have 5 users working on a complex assignment, and each of you are working on one individual piece, but then once you've done your bit, each of you have created, say, maybe 5 different worksheets, and you want to merge all of those 5 into one. Rather than emailing back and forth or creating a master workbook, you can basically create what's called a bookmark, which basically stores all the key data along with the data source in a particular format. And you basically open up, and you do the same thing for all 5 people, right? So hypothetical situation. So all 5 people would create their own bookmarks, and the consolidator, who has a lucky task of merging all those files, would basically open up those bookmarks all at once, and by magic, all 5 bookmarks will get created as 5 different sheets inside the same workbook. So this is a great way to collaborate among your team members when you're trying to create when you're working on multiple pieces and want to combine them. Help obviously is help. So unlike other products that I've seen, unlike other tools that I've seen, this help option is really very helpful. If you're stuck for some reason, right? If you know what you want, but you really are not sure how to get there, this is a great starting point. So you can click on Open Help. It will open a whole host of searchable index options. You can type in what you're looking for. It's going to give you some step-by-step instructions. If you're beyond that, you can actually look at some training videos that Tableau automatically prepares. You can look at sample workbooks, which basically look at pre-populated workbooks that Tableau has created. And you can also click on sample gallery. This is kind of to give you, expand your horizons a little bit, how to go above and beyond to see what's out there that other people have created. So it kind of gives you a list, a selected list of what's out there. That's gallery. And other fun things like your license keys and so on. Okay, if you want to know what product, what version of Tableau you're using, this is where all the fun stuff is. So that's in terms of your main menu options. So like you've already seen, there's more than one ways to get to most of the things offered inside of Tableau. Okay, good deal. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start exploring data sets. Okay, so we'll import a data set and talk about the other part of dimensions measures. We're trying to import a data set. Multiple ways to do it, but let's start with this simple option. I'm going to say click on connect to data. So I'm going to say connect to data, and once I click this, it's going to give me a whole host of options. And I know my target file is an Excel file. My source data is an Excel file. I'm going to click on Excel and navigate to where my data is, and all I need to do is just click that and click open. So that's all I need to do. So click on open. I'm going to populate my data into a new window. And this is what you see is this is the first screen that you see when your data is first connected. So just a little bit terminology here, high level overview. So basically, this gives you what the connections are. It gives you the connection name, the Excel file that you're connecting to. This is a sheet that Excel has. So in my Excel sheet, I just had one tab, which is called orders. So that's what this is bringing up. And by default, it populates that order in this open screen here. It also gives me a preview of the data set. So it gives me what the row or column name is. So think about it in Excel. Most of us dealing with data are very familiar with Excel. So I'll try to relate back to Excel so that it can kind of easily relate back to how Excel matches with what you're trying to see here. So each of these that you see here are your columns, right? So it has a column name, ship mode, customer ID, and so on. And just above that, in a slightly lesser font color, you see orders being repeated. By now, you would have guessed that is the data source name. So I'm bringing in all these fields, the column names from the data source called orders. So that's what this is. And up on top, you see some funny symbols. Okay, you see a pound sign, you see an ABC, you see a calendar type of icon. It's exactly that. They are data types. So we'll talk a little bit more about data types once we go inside the main working shelf of Tableau. Okay. So once you get a lay of the land, so you can scroll back and forth. By default, you can see it shows just the first 1,000 rows. You can navigate, you can change this and say, you know what, I don't want to see first 1,000 rows. Let me just see the first 10 rows. And then I'm just going to say type in 10 and click on enter. Just going to show me the first 10 rows and so on. So I can filter the data to the extent that I want here. I can also filter my data when it's imported, right? I'm not going to do it right now, but for now, just understand that if, for example, my data set is too large, or maybe I have a massive data that I really don't need for all of my analysis, maybe if I want to filter for a specific field, say, for example, I'm doing an analysis on my eastern region. I maybe want to exclude my west, south, and central region. I can do that. I can click on add, and basically I can click on add again. and choose whatever field that I want. Say, for example, in this case, region, and then I'm just going to say just filter for the specific regions that I need or don't need. Since I'm not going to do that, I'm just going to press escape and escape back again so that we come back to where we started off with. So two important things here. By default, your connections are live. So what does a live connection mean? It exactly means what it says. So your data is connected to a live data source. So in this case, my Excel file, right? So whatever changes I make in the Excel file is directly connected to my Tableau workbook. So if I want to see the changes reflected on my dashboard or on my workbook, all I need to do is just click on my Excel file, make the changes, come back to Tableau, refresh my connection, my data will be reflected as per my data source, which is my Excel. You also have an option to choose an extract. So there are a couple of scenarios extracts work really well. When you have a large data set, you typically want to think about choosing an extract, because when you're doing a live connection, rendering becomes slow. I won't call it slow. It really becomes dependent on the processing power, your RAM of your system, right? So Tableau will still work, but you're going to find it agonizingly slow if you have a lot of data sets, if you have a large volume of data set. So generally, it's preferable if you're working with large data sets, I would generally prefer extracts. What extract does, it imports a data set inside of Tableau, and it does its magic. The data set gets compressed, and once the data is loaded inside of Tableau, it becomes a lot easier. It's as though the data is sitting right next to the Tableau data engine. So it's pretty seamless. If you have large data sets, like I said, the rendering becomes seamless. If you drag and drop objects, when you're using an extract, it's very seamless. So that is what an extract is about. You can still refresh an extract, right? It's pretty much the same procedure. If you want to make changes on your source data sheet, you can make changes there. You come back to Tableau, click on refresh your extracts. It will still pick up the changes that you made on your extracts. So that option is still available. So for now, let's just choose a live connection because this is a relatively smaller size of data that we're working with. So once you're happy, you're comfortable with how your data is going to look like, then you start to import your data. So obviously the two options here, the orange shaded line here, the sheet here, which says sheet 1. If you click there, that's going to take you directly to the worksheet. Or just to make it easier, if you click on go to worksheet, you go there, it takes you to the worksheet there as well. So I can do one of these two things. I'm going to click on sheet 1 here, and basically going to take us back to my original view that we saw with a minor change. By now, you would have noticed you're still looking at the same screen that we saw earlier, but now it has dimensions populated. It also has measures populated. Okay. So before we talk about dimensions and measures a little bit more detail, remember in my introduction, I talked about two friends that I introduced you first. Okay. So these are these two friends, right? I have a red cup, I have a blue cup. That's what this is all about. Tableau's chart engine primarily talks about these two dimensions and measures. All the data in this world can be broadly classified into a dimension, which is a blue cup, or a measure, in this case is a red cup. Okay, so that's all you need to know in terms of choosing chart types. So before we go to choosing chart types, let's say hi to your friends again and come back and see how Tableau automatically deals with dimensions and measures. So like I said, based on the data type, Tableau automatically populates dimensions into dimensions. So think of dimensions and measures as this. So if I were to ask you the question, what are dimensions and what are measures? Let's try the easier one. What are measures? Take a moment to reflect on what a measure is. Some of you might think it's numerical. Some of you might say it's a value. It's all of that, but apply this test. If you can aggregate a measure, aggregate a variable, then it's a measure. Got it? So think about this. Let's take an example. If I can do a sum of something, if I can do an average of something, if I can do a variance or a standard deviation or some sort of a numerical aggregation on a particular variable, then it's a measure. So that's a test of a measure. On the other hand, what's a dimension? Take a moment to think about what a dimension is. Take a moment to reflect about examples of dimensions that you've encountered if you're working with data. So things like labels, categories, these are dimensions. So again, the test for a dimension is if you can slice and dice your data, right? If you can slice and dice your data by a particular variable, that variable can be classified as a dimension. So that's all there is to it, right? So dimensions, measures, all the data in the world can be broadly classified into these two variables, these two categories, high-level buckets. Obviously, there's more to it, but you start with this. You start with the high-level overview of dimensions and measures. There are two types of special dimensions, which we'll talk about later. So, but for now, just understand dimensions. I can slice and dice my data. Dimensions are categorical. Dimensions are labels. So things like place names, my city, if it's slice and dice, sales by product name, by product region, by account manager, by customer name, by customer ID, and so on. These are all dimensions because I can slice and dice my measure with a dimension. Measures, like I said, are numerical values or things that can be aggregated. So these are dimensions and measures. So if you notice, Tableau automatically puts these in dimensions and measures into these buckets, but it always is a very good practice to make sure that the dimensions and measures are looking exactly the way they should be or where they are placed, right? So in addition, dimensions and measures, we're going back to these symbols here. You see these symbols here that says ABC. So that means it's a text value. So Tableau also picks up the metadata characteristics. Metadata characteristics are otherwise data types, data variables. So you can see category is denoted as ABC, which means it's a text field, which is fine. You notice a globe icon for city and country. So Tableau automatically picks them up as geospatial values. So it assigns lat-long values to these variables here. And you also see a third icon here, which resembles a calendar. It's exactly that. So whenever it detects a date field, it detects a calendar icon here, and it's always a good practice to make sure your order, your date fields are always picked up as a calendar icon. I'll show it. You'll see in a bit. When you start working with dates, the calendar icon lets us do something phenomenally great. Because if your data type is, for example, if your date is categorized as a text or as a numerical value, you can't do certain functions with dates, and we'll see what those are in a later bit. But for now, make sure everything that's identified as a date is in fact also formatted as a date. So these are the various data types of dimensions, right? So you saw ABC for labels, you saw the globe icon for geospatial values, and you saw the calendar icon for dates. Now, if you notice, customer ID, right? So think about that, customer ID, or let's take one more, maybe row ID, right? So think about this, is row ID a dimension or a measure? So take a moment to pause and reflect upon this. Now, row ID has, if you notice the data type, it's a pound sign. The pound sign implies that it's a numerical value. However, numerical value logically should belong to measures, but why is it in dimensions? Is that even correct? Think about that. So again, go back to what I talked about. I'm going to bring my two friends. Okay, so again, blue for dimensions, red for measures, right? So think about what is a test that we applied for measures. If you can do a sum of something, if you can do an average of something, if you can do an aggregate of something, it's a measure. So does row ID, if you do a sum of row IDs, if you do an average of row ID, does that make sense? Absolutely not. So that's why row ID belongs to dimensions. So this is how you could apply dimensions and measures as a test here. Okay. So say, let's think about hypothetical situation. Say, for example, Tableau didn't automatically pick up row ID as a dimension. What would happen? This is how it would look like. So row ID is probably going to be here down as measures. So this is where you need to be thinking about what is it that I can do? How do I bring the row ID back to measures? If you noticed a few seconds ago, the rapid speed or rapid clicking, I just dragged and dropped it. So I would do the exact opposite of that. I would basically click on row ID and say, hey, row ID, I know you're a number, but guess what? You don't belong in a measure. You actually belong to the dimension. So I'm just going to say drag and drop back this and leave it anywhere on the dimensions. And once you are here with your mouse, I'm going to let go of my mouse and it's going to get dropped here. Okay. So that's how you could move back and forth between dimensions and measures. So take a quick look at the measures. Discount, profit, quantity, sales, all four they do sound like measures, and they are measures because you can do a sum of discounts, you can do an average of profits, you can do a sum of quantities, average of quantity, and so on. So you can do numerical aggregations. So that is still valid. Now, something interesting comes up here. Lat long values, and within parentheses, it says generated. So that is a default value that Tableau automatically picks up, and they automatically bring it in because it detected geospatial values. So if you notice, we have city, country, and state, which are all denoted by a globe icon. So just like how Tableau detected these as globe icons and as lat long values and as geospatial values, it automatically generated lat long values. So there's nothing that you need to do right now, but just understand that these are automatically generated values. You also see one more automatically generated value, which is called number of records. So by default, every view, every data that you import, Tableau is going to pick up the number of records automatically and generates a field out of it. So that is a great value, a variable to use when you want to do an aggregate of something, when you want to do a sum of something, when you want to do a tally or a count of something. You can basically use the number of records to get a tally of something. Also down the last value on the measures and the last value of the dimensions, you see something called as measure names and measure values. Think of it as a collection of all the different types of measure names as categories, and collection of all the different measures as measure values. So we'll see where we can use them in a later session. Okay, so these are the most important fields, or this is how your data is going to look like when you first import data inside of Tableau. So once you import data, obviously you look at measures and dimensions and you know exactly where they belong, and if you swap them correctly, now next step is to move on and start creating your views. So how do we create our views? So let's take a simple example. Right, I'm going to create a basic report being columns of rows and numbers, columns and rows of numbers and categories, basically summarizing a particular data set. Let's try a simple one. I'm going to say drag and drop. All it needs is just a simple drag and drop. I'm going to click on subcategory. I'm choosing subcategory. I'm going to drag and drop it and place it onto rows. Okay, so notice it has an orange icon with a triangle just above where I'm dropping this mark. And if you see that, then that means it's ready to go. So once I drag and drop my mouse over here, and then I'm going to let go of my mouse, it's going to place it right over there onto the rows, and the actual values get displayed down here. So that's how your view is going to look like. Ignore these ABCs. ABCs are basically placeholders. So think of ABCs as placeholders because we've not added our second friend yet, which is a measure. Right now, all you're doing is displaying the dimensions under subcategory. So these are all the different options that are available for me under product subcategory. Since I've not added a measure, ABC pops up, but once I add the measure, ABCs will turn into measures, assuming a different form than what you see here. And we'll see that in a bit. So I can also drag and drop items on columns. So let's say I want to see my subcategories, but also want to see within subcategories, what are the different regions that are under my subcategories. So I'm going to click on this region and drag and drop this region onto columns. I'm going to let go of my mouse while I'm just hovering above my white space here. So again, notice the inverted orange triangle. So that means you're good to go. You can let go of your mouse and then it's going to get popped up there. So I have region going across on columns, rows going down on my rows. Basically, I have a matrix or a pivot summary. Now, let's start to add some numbers. I want to add sum of sales, right? So I want to add sales basically. So I'm going to click on this measure of sales, drag and drop sales, and just place it anywhere inside this ABC place here, right? So you know you're ready to go, because let me do it again. I'm going to drag and drop sales. Notice that everything is plain here, but when I drag and drop sales into this ABC shelf, it gets highlighted with a black border around it. So that means I'm ready to go. I can place my measure inside the shelf, and then my ABCs will get transformed into the next step, which will happen when I let go of my mouse like this. Okay. So basically, like I said, the ABCs get a new form, and you can basically see the values. You can see the values that correspond to sales. So take a minute to understand what this really means. So what does this 85,231 mean? Think about it for a moment and try to explain it try to write down in your own words what this means. 85,231 is the sum of sales of chairs in the central region. The key here is sum of sales. Don't just say sales, because sales could be average, it can be a variation, it can be a deviation, it can be a median, it can be a sum. So always note that Tableau by default aggregates all your measures, because you're not looking at the data at its lowest level. We're trying to look at it at a slightly higher level of data, right? So a higher level of aggregation. So here we're aggregating the data to subcategory and region, and hence 85,000 is sum of sales. If you want to get a little bit more clarity on what the actual aggregation is, this actually displays it for you. So if you notice, my text icon gets highlighted, and I can see sum enclosed within sales. So that means whatever I'm seeing here is sum of sales. Great. So what if I want to add one more measure? I can do the exact same thing, right? I'm going to click on profit, and I'm going to drag and drop profit just like how I dragged and dropped sales onto that ABC icon. So I'm going to click on profit, drag and drop profit, and leave it under the show, bring it into this rectangle till you see that the rectangles are all highlighted in the black border. And then I'm going to let go of my mouse, and sure enough, something else happens wherein I can see two more variables getting popped up. So by default, if you see, my subcategory also has an element of the measure name displayed as sales and profits. You also notice something different happened. On your rows, there's a new measure or new variable called measure names. And something else happened. Previously, if you on your text value, you had just sum of sales, but now it has measure values. Remember, I told you in the earlier module wherein we talked about measure names and measure values. These are exactly that. Measure names are going to include all your measure names. Measure values are going to include all your measure values. So since I have just profit and sales, these are the variables or the measures that I'm seeing right now. Once it's up there, you can basically manage your views just by navigating or moving your items back and forth between your rows and columns. So I can say, yeah, this is great, but what if I want to see region and then measure names? I'm going to drag and drop measure names from rows and drag it onto columns. Notice what happens. Instead of seeing profits and sales as rows, now I'm seeing profit and sales as columns down below each of the regions. So take a minute to understand what this is telling you. So by subcategory, I can see within a particular region, what is my profit and what is my sales. And then I can move on. As I move along my rows, I can see for the Eastern region, for accessories, what is my profit? Again, sum of profit, that is the key. The sum of profit is 11,196. Sum of sales is 45,033. I can swap my arrangement. So now you have subcategory, you have central region, you have Eastern region, Southern region, and Western region. So if I were to read this, I would say accessories, profit, again, sum of profit, which is 7,252, sum of sales, which is 33,956. The key here is the sum. So always understand that Tableau by default aggregates it, right? So if you want to change the order, before changing the order, think about when you would use this type of report. If you were to compare by each subcategory, within each region, what your profitability is and what your sales is. So that would be the business question you're trying to answer. Think about this. If I were to swap these values, I'm going to drag and drop. I'm going to put the measures before the region. So I'm going to click on these measures, drag and drop this towards the left till I see the orange triangle. I'm going to let go of my mouse. And then you notice my measure names are switched or they're flipped. So now I can see for each subcategory, what is my profit across all my regions? And then I come to what is my sales across all regions. Even though the data is the same, the simple rearrangement or the flipping can be used in different contexts. The earlier one, wherein I was looking at profit and sales within a particular region, but here I'm using profits. If I want to analyze profits for a particular region, then move on to analyze sales for a particular set of regions, then I could use this. Okay. So let's switch back to the previous view so that I have something like this. Now, try to answer this question for me. And let me write it here. I want to ask you the question, which region and subcategory has high sales and low profits? Take a moment to reflect that. Okay. So I want you to tell me which subcategory and under which region has higher sales but lower profits. You can pause the video for 2 minutes and you can try to understand that. But guess what? Don't even try. Part of the problem is when you're trying to read through this data set, this is a simple report. Each cell that you read takes up one chunk of your memory. Basically, you're processing the data one at a time. And hence, you're not going to answer this particular question where you're trying to talk about understanding insights in terms of which subcategory has high sales and low profits. Okay, so let's change this visual. Let's change this to a slightly different visual. Instead of a tabular report, let's try to change this to a slightly different view so that you can try to answer this specific question a lot easier, right? So I'm going to create a new sheet, right? I'm going to click on this plus icon and it's going to create a blank worksheet for me. And let's try to recreate the same variables that we had before. I'm going to drag and drop subcategory onto rows, subcategory onto rows. I'm going to drag and drop region onto columns. I'm going to let go of it once I'm here. And I'm going to drag my first variable, which is sales. So instead of keeping the sales as a text value, I'm going to drag and drop sales onto the columns and let go of it, let go of my mouse here. So take a minute to understand what this means. So here, length of the bar denotes sales. Is it really sales? It is really sum of sales. So length of the bar denotes sum of sales. So accessories has in the central region has a sales of 33,956, the sum of sales of $33,000 and so on. That's how you got to interpret the length. So again, bigger the length of the bar, greater my sale. So once you get that, then it's time to add our next measure. I'm going to add profit. So I'm going to click on profit, drag and drop profit onto color, right? So drag and drop profit onto color and let go of your mouse once you're hovering above color. Notice what happens. A legend pops up here. Legend that goes from orange to blue with a central point of about white, which is 0, right? So interpreting the colors, darker the blue, greater my sum of profit, darker the orange, greater my sum of losses. So that's how you got to interpret that. Once you get this, try to answer the same question that we posed from the previous workbook. Which product subcategory and region has high sales and low profits? Your eyes are probably immediately drawn to this big red bar here, right? So this basically tells you that tables in the eastern region have very high sales, but also extremely high losses. So think about what it did in the previous view. I'm going to toggle back to the first view. Same exact data, same exact data points. We've done nothing different except added size and color, right? So if you go to sheet 2, basically you're seeing the same data, but then your eyes are drawn to this big red bar, which kind of helps you to answer this question that we posed, which product subcategory has high sales and low profits. The reason I did this exercise is because I want you to understand the power of what is called as pre-attentive attributes. What are pre-attentive attributes? So these are, remember, when you're referring back to the 7 steps on visual analytics, I talked about leveraging the strengths of our brain. Pre-attentive attributes are attributes that help us to leverage the strengths of our brain. So what are pre-attentive attributes? So think about this. When light shines off an object, our eyes look at an object, it gets reflected, and our brain basically breaks it down into simple building blocks of vision. So these simple building blocks of vision are simple shapes like lines, squares, rectangles, circles, and so on. So once our brain breaks them down into simple building blocks of vision, then our brain processes all of that, puts interpretation on top of that, and then spits out back that exact same image. It's not really the same image, but it adds all these other interpretation that it has. So this process of breaking our objects into simple basic building blocks of vision, these attributes are called pre-attentive attributes. Okay, so simple things like color, shape, size, and so on are one of the more commonly used pre-attentive attributes. So in order for you to understand this specific question, where you're talking about tables and eastern region, we used two of the most powerful pre-attentive attributes, size and color, right? So size of the bar, longer the bar, greater my sale. Color of the bar, darker the red, greater my loss. So this is a direct application of what pre-attentive attributes look like. Okay, good deal. So let's create a new sheet. I want to show you some other features inside of Tableau. So let's go back to the earlier example. I'm going to drag and drop subcategory onto rows. All right, I did that. And one of the options that I have in Tableau is I can sort my data, right? I'm going to drag and drop sales onto columns. And this basically gives me sum of sales for each product subcategory. Notice how it is ordered or sorted. By default, it does an alphabetical sort. All my A's are on top, followed by B's and C's and so on, right? Most business cases, most business situations, it makes absolutely zero sense to do an alphabetical sort. Rather, we would try to sort it based on some sort of a measure. So in this case, the primary measure is sales. So most business questions that are going to come out of this view are going to be related to things like, what are my top 3 subcategories in terms of sales? What are my worst performing sales items? So if you're trying to answer those questions, sorting is really a key, right? So in order for you to sort your data, there's a simple one-touch sort that we earlier talked about when exploring the different menu options. So here we go. If you click on the arrow mark right where my mouse is pointed, right here, that's going to do a descending sort where I'm going to place my higher values up on top, my lower values down on bottom. If I click on this, it's basically going to do a descending sort. For those of you who want to say, you know, length of the bar is not enough, I also want to see the values of what those bars mean, I can actually click on the text icon here, which basically is going to say show mark labels. So I want to click on show mark labels, and sure enough, my labels get populated towards the end of each bar. So I can see sum of sales and product subcategory. If I want to see the other way around, if I want to see my lowest performing items in sales on the top and highest towards the bottom, all I need to do is just click on the next sort option, right where my next mouse is placed. And I would say sort by ascending order from low to high. So this is a simple sorting option. Okay, good deal. So now that you have basic idea of how charts work by using the marks card, by using the labels card, by using the quick sort options, now let's talk about how do you create the most appropriate or most efficient charts by using different measures and dimensions. So now we're going to be talking about how to choose chart types based on data types, right? So this is probably one of the most important part of the presentment part of visual analytics, wherein you're talking about how do I choose the most appropriate chart based on the data type. So again, there are two things you need to understand. What is the data type? Well, I'll talk about that. That's the second part. The first thing is, what is a business question we're trying to answer? Depending on the business question, you're going to choose chart types that cater to this specific business question. Choosing charts is the second thing you need to be aware of is what is the incoming data type. Like I said earlier, measures and dimensions. So by now you would have noticed whenever I talk about measures and dimensions, I'm going to bring my two friends here. So choosing charts is all about understanding your two friends in a lot more detail, right? So choosing charts is primarily based on how many dimensions do I have and how many measures do I have, and combinations of dimensions and combinations of measures will lead you to choose a most appropriate chart in a scientific manner. So that is what you need to know. So let's try to understand this. Let's take a simple example. What is a chart type you think I'm going to choose when I have one dimension and one measure? Think about this for a minute. So one dimension and one measure. And let's use our data for a little bit more understanding. So let's say my dimension is going to be something as simple as maybe category, and my measure is sales. So what is the best form of display that I would choose when I have a category and sales? You probably have guessed this, probably a bar chart, right? So let's draw this. I'm going to drag and drop category onto columns. 3 different categories. I'm going to drag and drop sales onto rows and place it right over here. One dimension, one measure, category, sum of sales. Length of bar explains sum of sales. Good deal. So this is the most basic chart when you're trying to think about one dimension, one measure. So once you have that nailed, then I want to have, so this is where we started, right? One measure, one dimension. Now I want to add one more dimension. So I have 2 dimensions, but just one measure. What do I do? I can still go with a bar chart. We'll look at some more complicated options or more sophisticated options later on. But right now, let's say by category, by sum of sales, I want to maybe analyze region, right? So I'm going to say drag and drop region right next to columns and say by category, by region, this is my sum of sales. And let's let's just put on a text label. So I'm going to click on show mark labels and display the values there. So I'm saying by category, what are the sales within each region? Now I can play with this a little bit. If I don't like to see a lot of bars going left to right, I can swap this. I can say, you know what, I can flip this region, drag and drop region right onto rows and say, you know what, this is a lot better because I can see within a particular row, I can see all the regions and all the sales, right? And I can see the subcategory. I can see each of the regions, what the sales are, well, how they went up, whether they were flat, and so on. So this I can do as well. I can also swap it the other way. I can drag and drop the region onto columns, or I can drag and drop the category down onto rows, where I can see by each category what region is. So I can do all of this. I can also do a stacked bar, right? So with these two dimensions, I want to say maybe, you know what, category is fine. I want to see within each category, I want to see one bar that basically stacks up all the regions. How do I do that? So I'm going to take the region, right, that's right there on the columns. I'm going to drag and drop region onto the color shelf. So the color shelf, again, remember, to remind you, this is a marks card, this area. Within the marks card, I have color shelf, size, label, and so on. I'm going to use the color shelf here. I'm going to drag and drop, take this region, drag and drop the region just and place it on top of color. Notice what happens immediately. Each of the categories now have a different color, and magically a color legend also pops up which tells me what these colors mean. The blue bars denote central region, the red bars denote the southern region, and so on. So within each category, I can see what is the total contribution of my particular region sales. So that's a stacked bar. Now, what if I want to still maintain the colors, but go back to my original view wherein I had region onto columns? If I just drag and drop this onto my columns, I'm going to lose color. So I'm going to do an undo. Remember, I told you I can do multiple undos and redos. So I'm going to make use of that feature. I'm going to click on this undo. I'm going to go back to this view. If I want to add the region but still yet maintain the region as a color shelf, all I need to do is just drag another instance from my dimensions and drag and drop it over columns. So that way I'm still maintaining my color legend and also including region on my column shelf. This is critical for you to understand. In some later examples, we'll be using a same field in multiple marks. You can use the same field in multiple columns, multiple rows, multiple marks card, multiple filters, and so on. So you can basically use them as and when they're appropriate. Okay, so good deal. So I can also do the same thing, as you know, if I drag and drop region right next to rows, and I'm going to drag and drop sales onto columns, I can create what's called a side-by-side bar, which basically tracks this, and so on. So these are options that I have to deal with when I have a single dimension and measure. And you also saw how you can expand the dimension into one more dimension. Okay, so let's call this bar. I'm going to drag and drop region onto columns so you can kind of see a concise view. Let's call it bar. Good deal. So let's try to create a new chart type now. So like I said, a bar is a basic chart type. One extension of a bar chart and combination of a bar chart and a report is a text table. So what is a text table? So I'm still using one dimension and one measure, right? So I'm still going to be using my two friends, one dimension and one measure, where my dimension is going to be maybe product subcategory. My measure is going to be sales. So let's try that. So I'm going to say subcategory, drag and drop them onto rows. I'm going to drag and drop sales onto text, right? So I'm going to use this text marks card here. I'm going to drag and drop sales right over text values here. And sure enough, I get a simple report. This is where I can enhance my report. I can say, instead of just displaying text values, but I don't want to use bar charts, but I can encode some marks characteristics to slightly display the view so that I can read it a lot easier. Let's see how we can do that. I'm going to drag another instance of sales and drag and drop that over color and see what happens. So now you're not just looking at sales as values, but then color denotes something else. If you notice, there's a color legend that pops up to the right. Darker the blue, greater my sum of sales. Lighter the blue, lesser my sum of sales. So I can, in addition to reading the labels, I can quickly spot the sales which are higher. Chairs, phones typically stand out, right? And maybe even binders stand out because of their color. I can change the way that my marks behave. So instead of displaying the numbers and the colors as fonts, I can maybe display them as an area, right? I can maybe click on the marks card here. And right now I have a whole host of options. Here's where I come when I want to choose the chart choice. By default, it chooses an automatic, which is a text value. But let's say I want to choose a square. Okay, I'm going to click on a square. And sure enough, not just my font gets highlighted, but my entire cell gets highlighted. So I can quickly spot through my dark colored bands of rows and quickly count to see where my highest sales are happening. This is called a text table. I can also create what's called as a, I can make use of the size function as well, right? So now, instead of just looking at rows and columns of colored shapes, I can maybe drag and drop sales onto this size shelf. See what happens. I can click on sales, drag and drop sales onto size, and I'm going to change my view from marks. Instead of a square, I'm going to say go back to a text value. You can see that the font size gets changed based on what my sum of sales is. So in addition to color, we are also using size to explain what the higher sales, what the category means in terms of fonts, in terms of binders. You see not just the darker colors, but also bigger fonts. So let's do something else. I'm going to take away my sum of sales from my values. And instead of size, let's use something else. I'm going to say, I'm going to drag and drop sales away from my size function as well. And in fact, let's do this. I'm going to drag and drop sales away from everything else. Okay. So instead of the text value, I'm also going to use a slightly different shape. So I'm going to say right click on text, the marks card. I'm going to say instead of text or color, let's use a shape. I'm going to click on shape, and you notice immediately that another icon pops up, another marks card pops up, which displays a shape. Here's where you can control the different types of shapes that you can create. Let's drag and drop sales onto the shape shelf here. Okay, so once I do that, notice what happens. Every sale gets a slightly different shape here. So this is probably not that intuitive, but I just wanted to show this as a function that's available. I would probably never use this because it doesn't make sense, right? So typically when you're dealing with measures, you're trying to deal with measures that make sense in terms of a numerical range, but I would generally not try to do that. So, but just that is there as an option for you to choose if you want to do that. But generally I would choose categories over measures to depict shapes like this. I'm going to do an undo, back to where I was. And let's use size, right? So if I drag and drop sales onto my size shelf, notice what happens. I'm using a constant shape, but I'm weighting that constant shape with a size. right? So darker or bigger the size of the circle, greater my sale. Now I can change the shape. Say if I don't want a circle, I can say, if I click on the shape shelf here, and I can choose a square, for example. Or I can choose a filled square if I click on this value here. So now you can see the size of the square depends on the sum of sales. In order for you to view it a lot better, you have some control options here. If you click on size, there's a slider that appears. So if you drag and drop, if you just slide it a little bit higher, then you can see how the sliding function works, and darker, the bigger the size of the square, greater the sale, and so on. So this is how you would use, basically, again, what we just talked about are different variations of using one measure and one dimension.
This time, let's try analyzing, say, maybe what really happened at this point in time, November 2017. I really maxed my sale at that time of the year, and I would like to see what happened that month. It contains a cumulative value of A's contribution and B's contribution, which means I'm just saying if it's 40 plus, say, 30. Just my top 4 items in here contributes nearly half of my overall sales. That's exactly how I see this in here. So that's really my bread and butter of my sales numbers in here. If you see any items that goes in the reverse direction like that of tables, they're all a loss-making items in here. And this item, your office supplies, well, it was doing pretty bad, but by the last year, it gained a second rank position, overtaking that of furnitures.
So let's talk a bit about calculations. What if you want to extract just the first name out of this? Let's try to do that with the calculation. So lead time between order date and ship date is what I want to depict, right? Because I want to calculate the difference in days between the two dates, wherein the start date is my order date and the end date is my ship date. Other type of calculation I want to talk about is logical operators. So these are if, and, or type of calculations. Not only do we want to see customers who have high sales, but maybe high profits as well. We can make use of what's called as the OR function.
Let's kind of get all the content that we need to create for this particular storyboard, and then let's start to actually arrange them on a dashboard, and then we'll start to give out our insights in here. It has lots of values. It has values close to almost 5,500 data points. Now that I have broken them into individual points, it's just a matter of taking the point ID, and that's your custom polygon mapping. Let's now talk about how to create route maps inside that of Tableau.
So let's talk about joining data. Topic that will be useful if you're having data that is spread across multiple data sources, multiple spreadsheets, or something like that. So how do I make sure this filter connects sheet 1 as well? I want to understand how much are we selling to each customer from each supplier, and it needs to be linked to the order item detail and not the order header. So let's make sure the link is happening on the correct fields. All the data points that match from the right table. And in addition, whatever data is not on the right table, it's going to give you all the data points from the left table as well. So that's what this symbol indicates.